Um,
Hello, Metax.
as Metax speaking, pleased to connect to you in this manner. As I've previously spoken, I'm aware on certain inquiries and dimensionality and the idea of shifting in between those on your request. I'm aware that was your personal desire from me to have a, what you deem lecture on those particular topics.
Yes, and I want to say thanks for that lecture. And I wanted to work with you more in connecting with you so that I could more capable of experiencing dimensional shifts at a later time.
Your decision when you want to have experiences, remember, especially when you talk about timing and dimensionality, they were very malleable ideas. And I also thank you for the feedback, and I greatly appreciate it, and I enjoy sharing those concepts with you as well as others. However, keep in mind that time is not what you're experiencing it in your third dimension. So when you have the idea you need to wait time or other things need to pass in order for you to dimensionally shift, it's a contradiction as the other dimensionality that you could experience exists beyond your current understanding of time. So therefore it is indeed something that is always in the now moment whenever you in your third dimension, while you're experiencing it from a third dimensional perspective, are indeed in the time frame that you're currently defining your life and the world you're in to be. So in other words, if you experience dimensional shifting, it's not going to be in the future or the past, but always in the now moment. Only from your third dimensional experience you could see it that way.
Okay. I want to ask you if you could look into my energy and tell me what you perceive as far as my heart. Um, would it appear to be closed down or as a bit more open than what I would normally experience?
Your is perfectly fine. It's your lower chakras. You might want to work on more. Well, your heart could always use some more opening. There's nothing wrong with it. However, you should also ground yourself sufficiently and not linger in between those options. That when you're grounded, you close your heart, and when you open your heart, you lose your grounding. Those both very necessary and important. So it's something I would advise you to get some form of energy going between your roots, so your sacral, so your solar plexus and to your heart. Have a straight line there before you tend to anything else. Of course, the rest of your upper chakra system is also very beneficial. Well, it's always a good idea to start from the ground and move your way upwards there because then the energy from your planetary body can also flow all the way up into your heart, and therefore you can have a succinct connection there to will feed it rather than to just focus on that one aspect in your form isolated.
Okay, I see. Another thing, as far as I'm aware of two evolutionary paths, one being the heart, of course, and the other path, the darker path, incorporating violence, aggression, to perceive higher dimensionality. What I have not heard anybody speak of is other paths besides those two. Are you aware of others?
Well, there's an infinite number basically, depending how I like to define them. There's no need to define them, however, in my opinion, different paths at all. Those two that you're describing sound like very much extremes, if you will. However, you could choose a middle path, or you could say that both of those paths are indeed the same, looked at from a different perspective. And of course, you could also say that you're already there and you could shift there immediately just by identifying with the goal instead of trying to walk down a path I mentioned previously in terms of the time idea. You don't need to walk down a certain path. You can just define yourself to be at the goal. But then again, there is no need to define if you're walking down a path of any sort and working on yourself, which is normal in your current dimensionality experience. There's no need to define those ideas either light or dark or anything else, or focusing on what you're considering extreme forms of violence, or on the other end, being very pacifist and complacent perhaps. There's also the idea you can use those in conjunction whenever you're connected perhaps more to your oversoul and just be guided along wherever that might be. For example, if you want to get to a point B from point A, you can, of course, if you have a door in between, you could unlock the door with a key or ask somebody kindly to open the door for you, or you can just kick the door in either case, whatever currently seems the right option in the moment to get through that door, and then perhaps there's another door or another option later on, and you use a different method there. You don't need to cling to one particular method. And once you've taken the path of the dark side, so to speak, or the light side, you cannot access the other options any longer unless you put a blockage in your own conscious mind, if you will. It might make it easier for some if they choose one particular strain and define it as a pass, and for some others it might be easier to alternate.
Okay. One thing that's been on my mind for a while,
Yes.
for example, using, say, a darker path to experience higher dimensionality, right? But if you're using extreme violence, for example, doesn't that lead to lowering the frequency of that entity who's at the same
Depends.
time? Okay.
Continue.
Yeah. I'm just trying to understand. Well, you say, well, it depends. Well, one action you might take may or may not lower your frequency, but at the same time, you would have a desire to, how can I say, ascend
Yeah.
higher density. You understand what I'm saying?
I understand what you're trying to say. However, the idea is a misconception of the sort. The way I see it, the idea you have is that there's somewhat blockage that you're installing yourself. However, you have a definition of extreme violence that is not conducive with being at the idea of higher frequencies. However, in one way or the other, you could even say a handshake with another person could be violent if it's too harsh for the other person that's not used to it, especially if you're talking about different species or also just the genders in your species. And then there would be already some difference there where some might define something as outright violent, and on the other end, somebody else might just give somebody a friendly slap on the back, right? And those ideas could be considered violent by some others. On the other end, some might not consider it at all. So it depends greatly where you would draw the line of what is extreme violence and what is not. And especially when you're talking about different species, when you're destroying an anthill as a kid, it might just seem like a funny joke. For the ants, it's the end of their colony and extreme violence. So it also depends on your definition in the moment of what it is. I would say there's a wide line, and there's the idea that you can, when you're in the moment, act upon what currently seems to be the right call of action from your heart, if your heart is open. And then usually it will lead you down the path that is the most conducive to your current frequency. Also, when you're perhaps in a state where you can only get out of it with some form of violence, if you will, when you're locked in a box and you want to break free, you cannot get out of there without smashing the box. And you could say you're being violent by destroying an object, or you could say how you're freeing yourself from being in a state that's much lower vibrationally than you breaking out the box by physically destroying it. So you need to go with your heart in all times. If you intellectually try to define a past that way, you would likely get stuck, not because the wrong path, but because you're not listening to your heart.
I see.
You need to be very honest with yourself, however, and not let your ego get in the way. And in my opinion, that is much more of a defining path, more than, if you will, darkness or violence versus light and peace. More the idea of trying to work things out from your ego, which then, if you will, you consider more darker, or from your heart. But it's not so much the idea that your ego will always tell you to be violent, your heart will always tell you to be pacifist or non-violent in any case. In some cases, your heart might tell you more to act up, while your ego tells you that you need to be afraid and not speak or even ruffle some feathers in any regard at all. So it's not always that the path to the dark, if you will, is violence, or a part of the ego is always violent and dark, and the path of the heart is always peaceful and friendly. First and foremost, the heart is your guiding post. The heart is first and foremost your connection to your oversoul. So therefore, if you're capable to connect to your oversoul through your heart, it will always guide you correctly while you're in your cut off, which is then what you might deem with path of dark side, when you're cut off from your oversoul or any higher guidance, and you act purely on your ego instinct, perhaps, or okay, for reptiles, for example, or just on something you learned from your societal surroundings, then you will likely create more of a disarray, not because you're being violent necessarily, but simply because you're cut off.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Very well.
All right. And by the way, I have a friend here that's new to interacting with other entities, channeling in general. He wants to talk with you. I'm gonna
Very
put you
well.
on with him.
How you doing, sir?
Greetings, nice to speak to you.
Say it again.
I greet you, and if you
Oh,
have any inquiry, feel free
oh
to
yeah.
bring them up.
Yes, I was inquiring. Two things. Well, several things. One is how do you follow your heart? Another one
Oh,
is how do you just let go and just let your will take control, like or follow your heart, I guess.
yes, that's the most normal thing in the world for us. I understand some beings, such as yourself, or many of your peoples in your world, are struggling with it due to your conditioning, but it's automatic. Ideas you remove, or you just let go any limitation that you installed yourself, because naturally it is always there. You might remember in your younger years, on your time frame experience, in your so-called childhood, you are likely more in tune with it as a normal state of being of any entity when they're incarnated in a world, and some worlds are just more conducive to it. Some deliberately destroy it, like the reptiles, because they consider it a weakness, and some are just very distorted and confused, like your world, and it creates damage for other reasons sometimes. However, if you just let go of any blockages or trauma or anything else that you lay over your heart, and you say again, as I mentioned previously, it comes from the ego. If you just let go of everything, that is automatically what will take over, and you need a certain amount of trust in yourself and in that guidance process, and the rest will be very automatic. So it's all based on just letting go itself and trusting the process. You don't need to trust any person outside of yourself necessarily, as it really is yourself in one way or the other, your oversoul. It guides you through your heart system. It's good to have trust towards some beings, however, but it's up to you if you want to trust me or someone else out here or someone in your world or whatever. However, the idea mainly being you to trust the process itself, and that the process itself will guide you in the right direction, and just let it happen rather than trying to intellectually understand it. That is the main key in order to achieve such a thing as a heart opening or a guidance system in such a function that you're desiring.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome. Your third eye will also help you greatly once you're opened that up. It'll be a lot easier for you to receive guidance from anybody outside your own consciousness. It can guide you along, such as myself.
Okay, thank you. Is meditation a good thing?
Meditation is one tool to let go and work through anything that comes up. Of course, if you're doing this properly, so to speak, you're just laying in silence and just not moving your body and try not to think of something. But moderate, you let come up whatever there is that needs to come up and then process it. Because usually the things that will come up when you're in getting a state of meditation are the very things that block you from getting into your art. So if those things go and you sufficiently and successfully process them instead of trying to avoid them, and those issues subside, that is very likely a great method to get more in a state of blissful connection to your soul or anybody else out here like myself. If you wish to have some guidance along, that's a possibility as well. And indeed, if you get into such a meditative state, that would be a tool to achieve it. Again, it depends. There are many meditation techniques in your world. I would certainly advise the ones where you let come up whatever there might be as a blockage and then work through it in order to achieve the state of being fully opened up for higher consciousnesses.
Okay, thank you. And what about the my chakras? How 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 was they processed to get filled?
Well, your heart is one chakra in the middle of your chest chakra system. Idea is something that's very common in your world, especially in your more Asian in the subcontinent. We don't necessarily call things by such names or define them exactly the same manner. However, since that's something relatable to your world, it's something we can work with more easily while we're speaking with your people on Earth. So the idea being your third eye is one chakra, the sixth from below in that particular teaching, or the heart of the fourth, counting from below. So the idea being those are two, for example, then the root, your sacral, your solar plexus, then you have one your throat, and the crown, which is the back of your head, where entities, for example, like myself, can enter in, like I have now entered to some degree in David's forms, through whom I'm currently speaking by using his vocal cords, which is related to the throat chakra. And then, of course, your lower chakras that are more related to your identity in this physical world, etc., and being grounded, those things, your enjoyment of the physical world, they're essential for you to have a physical experience at all. And it's a great idea to work on all of them and not neglect them. And it's when you're in meditative state and you have any physical ailments, any uneasiness in any part of your body, it's very likely related to issues that you would then define in your Hinduistic teachings as one chakra. So therefore, if you're somewhat aware of what they stand for, you can get an idea what that pain or uneasiness in one region or another is related to in terms of your consciousness, and whatever blockage you're carrying around with yourself, that if you would resolve it, would likely have the greatest benefit for you in that moment.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, welcome.
All right, Metax.
Yes.
Wanted to let's talk about how pain is used by many entities in lower dimensions to experience higher dimensionality. First of all, tell me, why is that the case with pain? Why is pain so important?
Pain itself is just a sensation that you or any other entities experience when they're losing energy in one way or the other. There's a physical injury when the mosquito, for example, is sucking blood out of you. There you can see the mosquitoes gaining energy just by physically sucking your blood. However, other entities prefer to suck your energy out of your energy body, which is a similar function. However, it creates a lot more energetic depletion than just the blood. So it's not so much that pain is used by entities in lower dimensions, if you want to call it such, to achieve something higher, but their idea is the beings that you would define such are simply feeding off the frequency of others, and the experience of pain is simply a result of loss of energy that is being used by those other beings. However, the person is always in control of their own frequency field, and this only happens if the individual allows this to happen. So pain is in one way or the other also a feedback system from your own body, like when you're touching something hot and you hurt yourself. So it's a feedback. You take your hand away, or if you're doing something that leads to a loss of frequency or energy, either to an entity, as you mentioned, or to any other experience, that you also lose energy. Not just the way you can lose blood to a mosquito, you can also hurt yourself through what you might deem an accident by knocking into something and lose blood. The same way you can also just use energy by getting involved in a situation that's not conducive to your development, and then therefore you create a damage there in your energetic field, and then in your experience of your emotional body that translates to pain.
All right. Another reason why I'm asking is because when you were speaking on dimensional shifting, you suggested the idea of using pain to catapult yourself out of your body to experience that dimensional shift.
That is not necessary.
Say that again.
That is not a necessary step. You need to deliberately get involved with pain or to catapult yourself out of your body. That's perhaps more what you would deem part of the dark side, if you will, but it's your definition. It would be a forceful attempt to center or change the physical experience around you or your dimensional experience around you. But that's likely something that I would suggest predominantly.
Is that the method that most reptiles are using?
They're using a method, from what we are here aware of, that definitely has a lot to do with pain, and that's the reason I likely mentioned it. It's an example of what some entities are using, not what we over here would use, at least not in our current state of development. However, their idea would be that they also previously mentioned they get energy by hurting others in that idea, or they're just distancing themselves from themselves, and therefore with the idea of being cut off, as I mentioned earlier, from your what you consider oversoul or from the source of all energy. And they wouldn't define it that way, from what I understand. They see themselves connected through pain itself, but I would say it creates rather a disconnection than becomes necessary to create pain in order to have an experience at all. And then they create a dichotomy between their ego and their oversoul, and then that dichotomy is what causes the pain because they're fighting against themselves, which in one way or the other every type of conflict always is, which doesn't mean that conflict is always bad. You can also learn a lot from it. However, I would not necessarily suggest this method as the most permanent one, as it depletes your energy on the long run, the same way you can have deplete your energy quite a bit by, for example, eating substances, as there's a lot in many of your artificial food, etc., or your alcohol. It makes you feel better for a moment, but in the long run, it might backfire and you feel worse on the long term. You understand the idea? The same way, this method might be very intense and strong in the moment, but in the long run, it might become more difficult, and eventually it will wear off, and then you will have to cause yourself more pain than you would be capable of survival in order to have the same experience. Which is also why many of those entities then try to get more energy from outside in order to feed themselves and their own other entities that they connect to as well. The pyramid scheme, you would likely call this in your economy, except it's energy instead of money.
Yes, I was speaking with Crunk, a reptilian species. He validated this with me. Basically, the idea of being a vampire or a predator preying on others to sustain yourself.
Basically, yes. We have had the experience in our past as well, so we are very much aware of what this experience is like, and I personally have access to this memory, and I fully understand the concept behind it. It's just a very tedious and often backfiring method, in my opinion. But it's also no judgment of people or entities enjoy using this method and learn their own lessons with it.
And I would also go as far as saying, since I incorporated human body, which is of course heart-based, I already incorporated a heart. There's really no need to take a predatory path because I already have, how can I say, emotions to work with or a more direct connection to my essence or source. You follow what I'm saying?
The option to do so. Reptiles have a heart or emotion too. They just relate to it differently and see it more like something to be abused and destroyed ideally, and then take it from others instead. It's just the way that they learn to function. It works for them in a way or the other, but they also have problems the way we understand it. Every species has their own path and purpose and the whole existence of everything in one way or the other. We are not all the same. We are different puzzle pieces, and your kind in particular is also very emotionally unaligned with any particular path. You can swing from one extreme to the other. So you're in one way very fragile, but you're also capable of connecting to much different frequencies at a time. So it can be a strength also if you learn to use it wisely. But then again, as I mentioned in our interaction in the beginning, there's no need to define paths in one way or the other. You can just go with what your heart dictates and then let things fall into place. And whether using terms as predatory or not is just something that you can label things, not have a definition of them. But I wouldn't even suggest the necessity to dwell much on the choice of different paths, because when you follow your heart, it doesn't matter what it might be defined from any outside perspective. It is always the best path possible at any moment, no matter what other labels you can use for it.
Yeah, and I understand what you're saying, and of course, because labels are limiting, and I would prefer to be on a path of removing limitations.
Yes. Then again, you can do that right now and here. Just make a decision.
Yes. Time is drawing to a close. There's one more thing I want to ask about pyramids. Kalask spoke about pyramids, and learning from others, I'm aware that a pyramid incorporates a certain a toroidal shape, a geometry, energetic geometry that can have a strong influence of my frequency if I was to sit inside of a pyramid. Do you agree with this?
Toroidal field is not necessarily the same as what's being formed by a pyramid, but indeed, if you're in a pyramid, it's a pyramidal shape of some sort, constructed, depending also on what it is constructed of. Some metals or crystal, etc., are more conducive to those types of energies you're talking about. But in general, if you're sitting in such a field, whether it's a big pyramid like the ones that you build in some of your Egyptian or Mesoamerican regions, or it's a smaller one that you create yourself and you would even fit in your normal room or in your bedroom or anything like it, it definitely has an effect. It also depends on the material, the size, and how you're sitting in it, etc. But it definitely is different than if you're not using such, or if you would just sit in any other shape. It is a certain shape, also depending on how many angles or sides the pyramid has can be different. But in general, you can easier funnel energy, if you will, from the cosmos inside your body, or also send it out there, vice versa, if you know what you're doing.
Well, that's what I wanted to use it for. I came up with the idea, for example, of I'm going to be taking a trip over to Egypt, and I wanted to explore going inside the Great Pyramid and using meditations to project my energy field outward. And since the Great Pyramid is so large, it should theoretically amplify my own frequency field to a large degree, in a sense that it could possibly affect lots of people. Do you agree with this?
And definitely would have a greater effect than if you were somewhere else, let's say outside in a more angular building or maybe in a cave. It definitely would have a stronger effect just by you being physically there, would enhance it everything. So whatever energy you bring there would be enhanced if you manage to get to that room. So therefore, it also depends where you are in a pyramid, for example. But in general, it would definitely have a very strong effect, that's for certain. It can be positive or negative or neutral in any direction. Well, not neutral really, it will have an intensity with whatever energy you're deciding to enter that room and get into a meditative state, that's for sure.
Okay. And when I'm at home, this is the last thing I'm going to ask before we go, but when I'm at home, say for example, I grab some copper pipes and make a pyramid out of those and sit inside of that just for general meditate and balancing my energy states, or say the frequency of my heart, or any other chakras, or any other personal effect that I want to create in myself. Would you say that a pyramid at home, personal pyramid, would be best beneficial for that purpose, or is not really necessary? How would you
Of course,
feel
it
about
is necessary, but it definitely can enhance the frequency the same way I just described as Pyramid of Giza, as you're calling it. However, of course, to a much smaller degree, but it definitely would still have an effect. You can also place a crystal on top of that pyramid, if you will, if you're somewhat aware of the functionality of certain crystals, if you will, in order to have a stronger effect in one direction or the other. So you can set out a certain field already just by using that physical method. It is not necessary in order to have a meditative experience at all, but it definitely could be enhancing. So I'm not saying you should do this or you have to, but it definitely would have an effect if you desire to put your frequency in that direction, especially if you're deciding to put some crystal there on the top cap.
and a crystal as opposed to electric current, say charging the metal pipes with the current from a battery. What is going on energetically with that? What happens if I use that method?
Your body itself also has a certain energetic charge, which would likely then also interact with the pyramid, especially with some of copper. However, you could of course also electrocute yourself quite easily if you put, depending how much voltage you put on such a pyramid. So it can be both positive and negative, depending on how the strength and the degree of electricity you decide to apply to the device. Of course, you could also use it in conjunction with the crystal as well. One does not exclude the other.
Okay, that's fine. I'll experiment with those.
Very
And
well.
yeah, so I guess we have to go. The time is up. And like I said, I'm going to contact you again because I would like to. Well, you remember I said I want to move in a direction of connecting with you for dimensional shifting purposes. But until then, while I'm at home, can you give me a suggestion on focusing on the idea, say bliss, because bliss, pleasure would be the best way of connecting with you personally. So maybe I'm asking for visualization that you could suggest that I could use throughout the day until I talk to you again.
Yes, you could simply use a picture, line, or tiger, bigger feline, or of course the one that has been assigned by an artist particularly depicting me, and should be visible on your screen right now as well. The way David set up his electronics, as I understand correctly. If you're just using that picture, you could perhaps also print it out or something similar, if you will, if that makes it easier for you to focus on my frequency if you just look at there.
Okay, I would do that.
That's a simple method, yes.
Yeah. How would I know if I'm connecting to you when I'm sitting there quietly? Um, how do I know when I've made the right connection?
You will feel it. The same
Oh,
frequency that you can sense from me right now while I'm speaking through David should be available to you, maybe to a lesser degree, depending, or to a stronger degree, depending on how tuned in you could possibly become.
okay. All right, I'll do that. And I look forward to our next interaction.
I look forward to the next interaction as well. Much love to you, and I greatly appreciate your curiosity and willingness to learn on those topics. Goodbye for now.
All right, much love to you. Bye.
see you involved in this. Huh?